Hey guys, welcome to the investor.bet NRL round 18 betting trend preview. In this video, every week I go through all the upcoming games. This week, we're back to a full slate of 8 games, and the Dolphins are the only side that have the bye. I'm going to go through each one of these matchups, what the odds are, what the odds were in their previous 5 meetings, who's been covering, has the games been going over under the total, all that stuff to help you make really good betting decisions this weekend. And I want you guys to know straight off the top, everything I go through in this video isn't based off just my opinion or teams I do or don't like. It's purely based off statistics. That's how I've been able to be betting full time for the past 12 years. And so you're going to see a few of the tools throughout this video that I use. All the tools are linked in the description, but it's going through analyzing the statistics like you see here, analyzing like key players in and around and how that's going to impact team performance, going through the betting data, which teams go over or under, which teams are covering the different situations. These are just some of the few. So before we get into this weekend's games, I just want to quickly recap last week's matches where it was a very interesting round. So of the 7 games last weekend, 5 of them went under the total points line. It was a weekend of real low-scoring games for the most part. The only high-scoring game was the Knights versus Eels. It really could have been 6-1 to the under. The Warriors-Broncos game only just went over by half a point. Overall now on the season, the totals is still a slight lean towards the under. 65 games have gone under the starting total points line. Then of the other games, home teams won 6 of the 7 games. Cowboys beating the Panthers, the only away team winning their game. Home teams also went 5-2 against the spread. Home teams and underdogs performing really, really well this season, as I've spoken about in previous videos. The ATS records, home teams have covered 72 games and underdogs have covered 76 games. Last weekend, underdogs covered 4 of the 7. The favorites who covered were the Knights against the Eels, Dragons against the Dolphins, and Roosters against the Tigers. Interestingly, and the reason why I like to break this down a lot is home underdogs have been performing extremely well this season, and away favorites obviously performing really, really poorly. But if we break it down a little bit further, you'll notice favorites that are 0.5 to -6 points, they have a really, really bad record, whereas favorites -6.5 to -12 and -12 and greater isn't as bad. So this is the key area that's been producing those results. Also, on the money line records, favorites have a losing record that are -0.5 to -6 points. So super unprofitable backing those teams. However, favorites -6.5 or greater have a really good record overall. Now, looking ahead to this weekend's game, the first matchup on Thursday night, Parramatta take on the South Sydney Rabbitohs. Parramatta just continued to decline and doesn't really get any easier this week. The Rabbitohs, their past month has been a lot better than their first, 12 weeks-ish of the season. Right now, we're 2/3 of the way through the 2024 season. This is a game I feel like is very, very winnable as well for the Rabbitohs. They have a great record against Parramatta, winning and covering 7 of the past 8. As we look through, the Rabbitohs were an underdog when they met, only just back in round 12, and they won that game 42 points to 26. This was kind of the start of their hitting form. Then they've also covered 3 of the past 4. The game prior was round 12 last season, and they met once last year, and the Rabbitohs were 9.5 point favorites. Currently for this game, the Rabbitohs are -1.5. I do think there's a bit of value there in backing them to win this game. This is a game they really should be winning if they want to continue their form. Just purely based on form, there's a real big difference between these two sides. Statistically wise, there's not really a great deal between them. Both sides are really, really bad defensively, and I think this could be another really high scoring game. When they met in round 12, totals 48.5. It's only 2 points higher here. Slight concern with, a lot of games being low scoring last weekend, but Rabbitohs coming off the bye last week, I think they'll be primed for a big performance here. So like the Rabbitohs, and I also do like the over 50.5. 9 of the past 11 between these two sides have also gone over the total points line. The other thing to consider here as well is the past 8 meetings, the margin between these two sides has been 14 points or greater. On to Friday night, the early game. Sharks take on the Gold Coast. These sides played this game and then they meet again in early August. So they're going to have 2 games against each other. This is technically a Sharks home game, but it's not at Shark Park. So they lose a little bit of home field advantage based on that. But still more so in home territory. They're 8.5-point favorites. It's an important game. They win this. The last month or so has been really poor. It's mainly been their first 20 minutes of games that's been struggling, and their attack in general. Obviously, they racked up a score late in the game against Redcliffe, but aside from that, their attack hasn't been all that great. They had plenty of chances in the second half last week against the Bulldogs to win that game, but weren't able to do it. Now, the Bulldogs are number 2 ranked defensive side. So they have a little bit of an excuses from that perspective. A lot easier this week going up against Titans side, who are conceding 28 points a game on average. I think the Sharks will win this game. They have a really good record. They've won the past 9 versus Gold Coast and covered 7 of the past 8. Not super keen on the -8.5. Do like the Sharks to win the game, but feel like the spread is just a little bit too high and there's not a ton of value in the $1.42. The odds have moved out a little bit since last week. So see if we can get closer to the $1.50 mark, but I do like the Sharks to win. Gold Coast coming off the bye, and prior to that, a big win against the Warriors, winning 66 points to 6. Whether they can replicate that performance obviously remains to be unseen, but I feel like that was a little bit of an outlier as we look at them overall on the season, and I don't think they're going to produce as good a performance on the road as they're able to at home, which is something that we've seen for them this season. But important game for the Sharks. Pressure's on, and I think they turn up and win this matchup. The Broncos versus Panthers. Brisbane come back home here after playing in New Zealand last week. Panthers coming off a loss down in New South Wales against North Queensland Cowboys. Penrith have only lost 2 games in a row, once in the past 3 seasons. So purely based off that, expect them to bounce back this week. They also rested a lot of players last week. They're currently -4.5-point favorites. If I can get this number -3.5, then this is probably going to be a betting game for me. I think Penrith will take care of the Broncos, who do get Reece Walsh back in the lineup this week, but they've just been very, very inconsistent over recent times, and are a team that, as it currently stands, are very hard to back. Penrith have won 7 of the past 8 against them. When they met in round 3 this season, Penrith won 34 points to 12. Without Nathan Cleary this time around, but Broncos also without Adam Reynolds. Penrith were 10.5-point favorites for that game, down to -4.5. Feel like Penrith's performance last week is giving us a little bit of value. I think, if they had won that game, we'd easily be looking at -7.5 for this matchup. Around -6.5 to -7.5 is what I would have expected. And if you take in consideration, obviously, the amount of players they were without last week, that'll come back into the lineup this weekend, then I think they take care of the Broncos. So that's most likely the way I'm going to be playing that game. 6 of the past 9 head-to-head have gone under. There's most likely rain predicted for this game, hence why we only have a 44.5 total. However, it is 6 points higher than their meeting earlier this season. But probably staying away from a total on that game, but would lean towards the under 44.5, purely based off their recent history and also the fact how high it's jumped since their last meeting. Bulldogs versus the Warriors. This is a really interesting game. Warriors bounce back from their big loss to the Titans with a win last week against the Broncos, and they have a really good record against the Bulldogs, winning and covering the past 6. However, statistically, the Bulldogs have been the better side this season, and whether the Warriors can break through this Dogs defense, which is only conceding 16.7 points a game overall this season. I think at -5.5, the Bulldogs are being slightly overvalued. I have this number closer to -2.5 to -3.5. That's what I was expecting for this game. I'm not 100% sure right now on Wednesday whether this is going to be a betting game for me. But the 2 ways I'm looking at leaning is either side to win by 1 to 12 as my most likely bet in this matchup. Warriors do have a really good record. They play well against the Bulldogs. However, Bulldogs overall this season have been the better side. And so I feel like it's going to be a close game between these two sides. The past two games last season were decided by 12 points and 2 points, but were fairly low scoring games. Also, 4 of the past 5 head-to-head have gone under. Total at 44.5, slightly higher than their past 2 meetings last season. On the back of the Bulldogs' defense, I'd lean towards this being a low-scoring game. However, probably staying out of the total bet on that matchup. Tigers versus Storm. Melbourne, 12.5-point favorites here. Total 49.5. The Storm have won the past 6 versus West Tigers, and they've covered 4 of the past 5. When they met last season, the Storm was 6.5-point favorites, easily covered that spread, winning by 22 points. Prior to that, when they were at home, they were a 10.5-point favorite in round 4. Lions pretty much doubled from the last road meeting in round 16 last season, up to minus 12.5. The Storm are a side who obviously should be winning this game and winning it fairly comfortably. They're currently the number 2 attacking side, whereas the West Tigers are ranked last in points scored. So there's a big discrepancy between the two teams just purely from that perspective, and Storm are top 4 defensive side as well. So it's going to be hard for the Tigers to put up points. I feel like watching their games, they're not as polished as we've seen in stages this season. Like last week, against the Raiders, they should have won that game by much more than they ended up winning by. Stack of possession, in good field position, should have put up more points than they actually ended up doing so, especially in the first half as well. They just had a ton of ball inside the Raiders 20 and weren't able to capitalize on it. So just, not performing at 100%, but they'll be good enough to beat the Tigers. With the line at minus 12.5, probably staying away from the minus 12.5, but I do think $1.27 is being slightly above what it should be. I'd have the Storm under $1.20 for this game. So the way I may look at this matchup is I do think the Storm wins. So I'd be looking at playing a potential double up with maybe a Bulldogs or a Roosters. Make a decision closer to game time after this matchup. Cowboys versus Sea Eagles. Cowboys at home here, minus 1.5, total at 50.5. Cowboys last 4 to 5 weeks has been a lot better, and they're definitely on the improve, really putting it together. And I think this is another winnable game for them, even though Manly have a really good record against them, covering 7 of the past 9. The away team does have a good record in this matchup, winning 7 of the past 8. So obviously not a terrible situation for the Sea Eagles traveling to North Queensland for this matchup. However, I do think on current form, the Cowboys can win this game at home. They've won the past 2 versus Manly. In round 20 last season and round 15 the year before. Both those games were on the road as well. Now back at home. Feel like this game where the Seagulls won in North Queensland 46-18, they were 24.5-point favorites at $1.06 on the money line. So you can clearly see where the two teams were at late in 2021. But I like the Cowboys to win this matchup. Statistically, they're the better attacking side. And there's not a great deal between the two sides defensively. So I feel like they're entitled to be favorites, and I'm most likely to be backing them accordingly. That's probably one of the 3 matches I'm most keen on this weekend. Roosters versus Dragons. Roosters 13.5-point favorites. They've won 10 of the past 12 versus St. George. And this is another game where they really should be winning. They're the number 1 attacking side, averaging exactly 30 points a game this season, going up against the Dragon side, who's bottom 8 defensive side and a bottom 8 attacking side. Roosters should win this game and win it comfortably. Dragons are a team, like, they have won 3 of their past 4. So you can't say they're playing badly, but obviously this is just a different class of opposition. The Roosters put up 40 points last week against the Tigers, and I think they're going to put up another 30-plus total this week. Earlier this season, in round 8, they met at this venue, and the Roosters put on 60 points there against the Dragons. They're only a minus 6.5-point favorite. So the line has increased fairly significantly since that meeting, but I feel like it's kind of entitled to. The Roosters are playing a lot better now than they even were back in the first couple of months of the season. I'll be looking at the Roosters team total to go over here, or other option would be a full game over 51.5. The past 4 have gone over, and 6 of the past 7 between these two sides have gone over. But I think the Roosters do the predominant amount of the scoring, win the game comfortably, and much prefer their team total over. And then final game of the round, the Raiders take on the Knights. Raiders without Jamal Fogarty still gives Newcastle an edge here, traveling to Canberra. Knights have won 3 of the past 4. They come up 3.5-point favorites here. And I'd be leaning towards them winning this game. This game's a little bit of a tricky one to bet into because both these sides are very, very inconsistent and hard to trust. Canberra hung around well, as I mentioned, against the Storm last weekend. And the Knights put up 34 points last week against the Eels at home. And the Knights are currently the second worst attacking side in the league. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an indication on how poor the Eels defense is currently going. But I do like the Knights to win this game. I feel like Canberra's overall lineup's kind of caught up with them a little bit. They don't have that strong of a lineup. And they had a few little good run at the beginning of the season, but it's kind of dropped off completely since then. So Newcastle to win and cover would be the way I'm looking in the final game of the round. So overall this weekend, there's a few games I like and a few games where I, kind of really staying away from. Opening game to recap, Rabbitohs to beat the Eels and also like the over in that matchup. Sharks to beat the Titans. Don't love the line, but do like the Sharks on the money line. Broncos versus Panthers. Looking for Panthers -3.5 or -4. Bulldogs versus Warriors. I feel like this is a tricky game, but leaning towards either side, 1-12. Tigers versus Storm, it's probably a stay away game, but like the Storm on the money line to win and may double it up with Sharks, Bulldogs, or the Roosters. See how we go late in the week. Then Cowboys to beat the Seagulls. I'll be happy to take them on the -1.5. Roosters team total to go over, and Knights -3.5. In the final game against Canberra. That's how I'm most likely playing it. If you want to get all my bets for the NRL this weekend and all the other bets that I'm putting on the sports, check the link in the description. Also, if you're keen on horse racing is like the most profitable thing you can absolutely bet on if you really want to make a lot of units every single year. I'll put the link to the racing show that I've done for the past 2.5 years in the description as well, so you can check that out. Check out the results if that's something you're interested in as well. But hopefully this video has helped you, give you some insight into the games coming up this weekend. Put in the comments any questions you have or anything you'd like to see more of in these videos, and so I can do that for the weeks to come as we go into the final third of the NRL season and then into finals. So thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you guys soon.